Hello, it's another episode of Best Way to Change the World, and we're focusing on sound, and changing the world can be simply just doing things in a different way. So we're going to be focusing on binaural audio, and I'm going to be interviewing David Thomas of Sonic Boom Audio. He's based in Lewes and is a location sound recordist, sound designer and sound mixer, and has worked on quite a few high-end audio productions and has some knowledge of binaural. So we're going to be having a very frank discussion about that.
I would never choose to do drama in a studio. And when it comes to binaural, I suppose I better just get into the basics of the issues with binaural generally, really, which manifest themselves in pretty much every production I've heard, including the Macbeth. And I'm sure that Carl is very aware of the issues with it as well, in that, as you say, you kind of have to record it as it is. If you want to record extra effects in binaural as well, they have to be in exactly the same position in 360. It's very difficult to match up, because if you've got an actor who moves just a tiny bit, then you get quite a big sway in the binaural space. So an actor's head can seem to be moving around quite a lot. And also, even with the Neumanns, the sound tends towards being boomy, which you can fix with EQ in the normal ways, but only to a degree, and you can't do panning because the panning's already baked in and all this sort of stuff. So there's so many difficulties to doing it. I did this thing in 2021 called Temporal, and which hasn't been released yet, but it's going to come out. We've sold it to Audible, so it's going to be an Audible Easter, I think. And so our remit or our brief with Temporal was to do something that had never been done before. So I thought, oh God, great! How do we do that? So my first thing, never done before in audio. So I decided to mix stereo, binaural, and put it all into Dolby Atmos, and use Dolby Atmos as a full surround mix, of which binaural was a part of it. So that means that you can do all your Foley and your other bits and bobs in stereo or even in mono, and place them to match the original binaural recording. So what I found out pretty quickly is it doesn't get you beyond the inherent problems of binaural. Because we recorded all the voices binaural, we did a month of recording of me holding a really heavy Neumann head, and it is surprisingly heavy. So I think that my approach now, and what I started doing towards the end of the recording on Temporal, was to rely more on almost more traditional ways, in fact, using stereo mics and mono mics. Well, I rarely use mono mics, but and then putting it into an Atmos space to create binaural. So instead of using a binaural head, although I had to use a binaural head because I was kind of committed to it by that point, but I'm finding that the best way to do it is to use standard stereo and mono, and use Dolby Atmos to create the binaural, and you that way get a binaural that's compatible with speakers as well, which is not something that we particularly knew, but I did another Atmos binaural project for Radio 3, which was the 100th anniversary of The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot, and it was called He Do the Wasteland in Different Voices, which is one of the considered original titles for the piece. And so we had the permission of the cooperation of the Eliot estate to do a Dolby Atmos version for the anniversary for Radio 3. And by that point, I'd kind of given up on normal binaural. but I did. We had this funny thing where, in my initial discussions with the producer, I said, yeah, we can do Dolby Atmos for binaural, and we can do a version for speakers as well. So that they broadcast the speakers version and then we podcast the binaural version. And somehow this got lost in translation with commissioning documents and Radio 3 and everything. And they assumed that we were having one file that did everything, that was both binaural and stereo at the same time. And so I thought, well, let's see what we can do with this. So we actually worked out a way that we could make a binaural that was stereo compatible, which is pretty good. You get a couple of level changes in backgrounds and things, very small. But by and large, we kind of figured out that you can do binaural that's stereo compatible if you use Dolby Atmos. And that was kind of the end of it for me. I thought, oh, I'm not carrying a stereo head around again.
Because you can do it that way. And I'd certainly heard somewhere about with even with the Zoom mic to do it all in ambisonically and then just mix it down to
Yes.
not to binaural. But just so I understand, so in my because I don't come, I'm years ago, 100 years ago, I was a track laying on 16mm sound, but I don't, and I do have Logic Pro, but I don't fully know all the whistles and buttons. I just basically hoping, nobody else, sometimes you just have to do these things yourself. But ultimately I'm not don't fully understand the technical side, so I'm still coming to this quite new. But as I understand it, you've got your Dolby Atmos mix, because my brother's a professional sound mixer in LA and he's just doing it all in Dolby Atmos, and that's fine for my daughter's boyfriend, who's got this special, he's a gamer and a games writer, he's got the headphones which do surroundy sound, and if you've got the speakers, but when you get it down to what I'm in my ears, isn't it just then stereo?
No. Dolby Atmos, if you're doing Dolby Atmos for headphones, then you don't need any more than normal headphones, all the way through the process. Because when you go into Dolby Atmos, you go into headphones mode and it does all the binaural processing as you're mixing the original program. So you're always listening. So in my studio, I've only got stereo speakers. And, if you were concerned for people listening to your Dolby Atmos mix in a Dolby Atmos room, then of course you do need to check it on speakers. And in an ideal world, I'd check it on speakers, but I haven't got 10 speakers in my studio. So I do everything on normal headphones. So you don't need flashy headphones. And the great thing is that when you master it to binaural, the listener doesn't need Dolby Atmos headphones, doesn't need the AirPods with spatial audio, which is not refined, it's a simplified version of Dolby Atmos, basically. It is totally compatible with any standard stereo system. It plays back in binaural. And the difference between stereo and binaural fundamentally is if you close your eyes and listen to a stereo sound moving, panning left to right, it will go between your ears. So you'll hear it going, the sound being in your head and moving left to right within the confines of your head, literally between the two headphones. If you have a binaural recording, then the sound is very definitely outside of your head. It's not a sound that appears in your head. It appears outside your head, and you can say that's 5 feet away there, and you can point to it. And if you have the initial recording with a photograph, you will be able to see that they're right. Now, of course, there's always everybody's pinna, the outer bit of their ear, is different, and that's what gives you your location awareness. So there's always difficulties there. That once you're doing binaural of any sort, you have to you're within a compromise that my ears are different from everybody else's ears, and I think there's probably cultural problems which we will need to address to do with shapes of European ears compared to African ears, Asian ears, all that sort of stuff, and these days we're overcoming that with what's called a PHRTF, which is a personalized HTRF head transfer related function. So which is a tiny, you can get a camera to take a photo of your ears and it creates your own binaural profile.
Wow.
So you have a binaural profile in your phone, in your computer, in whatever, wherever your headphones plug into, that converts that binaural for your ears.
But presumably you have to, as a mixer, you have to set it up to do that. Is that a whole other process?
No, as the mixer, you do it. You can do it no other way than with your own ears. And if you have a personalized HDRF, then that's as close to neutral as you can get that bit of it. And then, in an ideal world, somebody else would, the listener, creates their own personalized HDRF. Apple iPhones have it built in. Now you just take a photo of your ear and do it. Who knows how accurate, how different things are, because at that point, of course, you're literally listening to people going, well, it doesn't work for me, or I can't see it, I can't feel it behind me, and there's definitely limitations, and maybe technology will take us further, I don't know.
Obviously, part of your job, I imagine, is to make sure things are technically as good as they can possibly be, and that it all goes out in a way that broadcasters are happy with. So
it's also to do that job of gluing the footsteps to the voice. There's a classic, if we're going down the rabbit hole of footsteps, which I could talk about for hours. Footsteps are always recorded with a mic by the feet. Now, we don't have ears by our feet.
Yeah.
We are directly above our ears by between 5 and 6 foot or whatever. And that noticeably changes the frequency response that we as humans are used to hearing of feet. So you have to account for the fact that our ears are are 6 foot away or whatever, and you have to EQ the feet to match that. And lots of people just put on the footsteps and they ride the volume of them to sound right, but it's never going to sound right because they're close mic'd, and you need to have the EQ matching as well to roll off the frequencies that your ear wouldn't normally hear. Technically, I suppose if somebody was walking along at your ear height, that would sound right, but obviously that's not the way things go. So you hear it all the time that people are not accounting for the original mic placement and all sorts of things like that. So, when I do footstep tracks, firstly, I like to do them real because we're on location, so you get them for nothing. If I do have to do footsteps wild, so then I had footstep tracks which had a starting point EQ put in it, so that you can then do the volume riding to match it, and then fine tune the EQ to where the person is standing. Because of course, if a person is standing in front of you, wherever they are, you need a different EQ for the footsteps. So, and as they approach, you need to change it as they approach and all that sort of stuff. But that's footsteps, it's not binaural.
Which, if you recorded that in a binaural production on location, so I'm practicing and exploring and testing out with a half hour. It was a short film, cinematic film that I've adapted.
Okay, so I would say you don't want to be doing different layers because your Foley won't match. Like we said, it won't match the position or anything like that. You won't get the right distances. You don't. The joy of doing something binaural is that you grab it as it is. It kind of defeats the object if you get clean versions, because you can't cut it. You can't change the panning. If you, there's no point. I really think there's no point.
I'm actually quite glad you said that, because of course, being a sound recordist, she's very nervous, and she's saying she should lapel mic as well, and other people saying yes. I know, but there's all this fear around it. So this is why it's so lovely to speak to you, David. So basically, we just keep doing the scene until we get it right, basically, and listening and make sure we've got it.
The biggest problem will always be planes. If you're in a field, it's planes, especially if you're in Forest Row or wherever you're doing it.
Ashurst Wood. I found a quiet field.
When we did temporal, we did. There's a big field up here where we did a lot of the stuff. Temporal
Mm.
goes through time. In fact, Beck was one of the main characters in it.
Yeah.
And she, yeah. So we took her to all the fields around Lewis, and we were there with a binaural head. You just do it all for real, because
Mm.
you don't want to be layering. Because also you get double layers of backgrounds, and one
Yeah.
of the problems, that happen a lot in binaural recording, referring back to other things, is when you layer things up, you get that muddiness building up.
Mm.
Things get very confused sounding and very muddy sounding, or things just don't match with stereo positioning. You have enough of a job getting the positioning right
Mm.
as it is, because the actor will be somewhere and they'll hold out their hand to do something. And because it's binaural, it'll sound like their hand's 6 feet long. So, even the hand movements have to be constrained unless you're doing something very specific. It's a very precise, you have to be extremely precise recording naturally in binaural. And you really kind of have to have, it's much more of a performance, as you've already
Yeah.
found out. Yeah.
So that's really helpful to hear, because I think that it's easy to get dragged into the fear factor and of trying to cover the bases. But at the end of the day, the director's never worked in binaural before, so we've been sort of doing various tests and things, so we can kind of give him a playbook for this. But I've already said to him, we need to have more than the usual amount of rehearsal time. We need to be able to rehearse, not just getting there, but they need to be word perfect. They, in a sense, it's very different. They're more, theatre actors will probably be better for this than people who've just used to doing, radio, studio stuff. And
So they won't have scripts in front of them then.
They'll have them available, but then that's noisy.
That's great.
It's,
it's
really,
brilliant
really,
if you can do that.
yeah. I mean, really, I mean, it's a half-hour play. It's not, Shakespeare complex speeches. They can manage
if you
it.
Can do it, then that's really good.
And I think we kind of have to really, and then let them play those scenes, which actually should be a bit of a gift, really. And the reason it is all keeping it local, because the biggest fear is if it rains. So we've got to lock in, by using local actors and a local director. There's a bit of, we'll have some weather cover days and built in, basically, because I did ask one, a binaural sound artist, what do you do if it rains? And he says, well, I always have the everything is through the ears with ear mics, so that covers that acts as a rain shelter. And I say, well, for me, I'm not looking for that kind of authentic sound. I like the way the microphone is almost like a camera, and using that to get perspective and to block the performance around it. It for me is part of the what makes it interesting, really. So the big question is
with moves, though. You can't use it quite like a camera, because you can't.
You can't move it at all.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I moved it a lot when I was.
Yeah, but you've got a head. You've got a head. I've got a zoom. You cannot move the zoom.
See, just because
mic.
of that bit. But
it's just so noisy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the and I think one of the things I like about it is so with Macbeth, one of the scenes that Carl described, which I really enjoyed and kind of made me think this is an interesting medium to work in, was that he'd have this long scene with the two guys coming through the gates of the castle, walking up to the mic, talking, walking past the mic and going up the stairs, and then they'd kind of pick up the next scene from there. And that, so some of these things that are disadvantages can actually be used as advantages. So what I'm trying to understand now is which elements to use as an advantage and which elements just to be aware of, like rain, that you just, I suppose you can't. So what have you done when it rained? I mean, how do you deal with that with the head?
Yeah, because we do everything on location, largely near here. We've got my studio, and because we kind of work with a company of actors, really. If it's raining, then we'll say, okay, well, we'll do these scenes in the studio today because we can't go out. So obviously, I suppose there's a point where you would get to, if it kept raining, where you would be a bit stuck. In which case, we rewrite the scene to be in the rain. You know, and we take advantage of the mud, and we all get wet.
But how do you manage with the sound of rain hitting? Because you can't put an umbrella up because that will bang off the umbrella.
Yeah. I on the binaural head, it's fairly impervious. I'm just trying to see up here, maybe in here.
Yeah, because I guess it's in the ears, so it gives that sort of a level of protection.
You get a little pitter pattering, but it's not bad. But this isn't the exact one, but
whereas water on the dead cat on the Zoom mic will be horrendous. Yes. Yes.
I put those on the ears.
Yeah.
So I've got some funny photos of that on the ears of the mic. On a Zoom. Well, I mean, what I end up doing, to be honest, thinking back to when I was working away a few weeks ago, and I recorded a really heavy rainstorm on this mic, which you can't see, but
oh yes, yeah.
With a windshield on it, with a fluffy Rycoat on it as well. But still, obviously, the rain was there. So I was literally standing there with my hands over the microphone and my elbows sort of, because obviously if you put it in front, then it blocks the sound. But you've just got to ride it with your hands. I literally put my hands over because that stops the sound better than anything else. And you just got to say, well, I'm going to get wet. I'm
thinking now, there's going to be a gazebo in this garden, and if it rains, they're going to say we're going to stand under the gazebo, and that's it. That's just the most obvious thing, because it then becomes part of the soundscape of where they are at that point. But if everything's been done,
you need to put something on top of the gazebo to stop the
because it'll make such a noise. Yeah,
blankets or you need something on top of the gazebo.
Blankets would do the job. Yeah,
certainly for a while. I think quite good.
And of course, doing everything in order. Kind of, is it Ken Loach always did his films, or some films, didn't they, where they do it in order of, which is lovely for the actors, rather than we're going to do this scene here and this scene there. But again, I think it's one of the necessities because of that continuity of the background, because it's going to cause problems otherwise. So to from what you've told me, and I have had this from another person who's done binaural and does the sound design, is the message seems to be do it in post.
Do what in post?
Don't record with binaural microphones.
That's my advice. It's a world of hurt, and if you're not very experienced, it's going to go very, very rocky very quickly.
And what was your with regard to listening to the Macbeth production by Almost Tangible? What was it about that you personally didn't think worked so well for you as a sound expert?
I think
basically
there's a few things, and it's not just that production. It's native binaural. It's inherent to native binaural, but it's things clag up. If you have to put a layer on, suddenly everything goes to mush. You lose control. Again, it's the swaying of voices as people move a small bit. And to be honest, I hate the Macbeth is not guilty of this particularly, but if I find a binaural production where somebody's whispering in your ear,
Oh,
meeting.
yes,
It's just
yes,
like,
yes, yes,
it's
yes.
like,
No,
come
that's
on, guys, we're
yeah,
beyond that now.
yeah,
We all know that microphones can do that.
yeah.
And gimmicks, I don't like gimmicks of it. I like it to be a representation, because also that thing of people walking past you. If they're walking past you, you turn your head. You wouldn't let them walk behind you, and you just stand there. So that's fundamentally unnatural. You have, I think you need to. I think it's great for ambiences where you hear the ambiences behind you, or somebody can come from behind because that's where you first perceive it. But I think if somebody comes past you and walks behind, you don't let them stay behind you, because that's just not how a
Yeah.
human reacts to it. So things like that, really. Yeah. And of course, you have to be, if you're the engineer holding the microphone, you're on mic. So you have to be super careful that your body is blocking the mic. So it's blocking what's behind you. So all the time, I mean, what I did in the end is I had a pole with the head on it, and I would crouch down, so you wouldn't pick up my breathing or reflections off my body, and that's okay for a while. But then an actor will move his head, so you have to, you have to sort of ride with them a bit, and that's tilting the pole, and it all gets very messy. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of something to be aware of as well.
Now, what we were looking to do was put the microphone, especially as it's so sensitive, on a what's it called,
A monopod or tripod or something.
yes, a tripod, just so it's solid, and part of the and the actors with the director block the performance around the mic, and almost like basically choreograph the scene, and then test it, see how it sounds, and then actually record it all in one go perfectly, obviously, first time.
But the actors turning their heads and things like that, that becomes an issue, because if they move slightly when they turn their head, which they do, they'll sway quite a lot off their position, which is fine once or twice, but it does get a bit distracting. So normally, what I do is I hold the mic and I just sort of glide the mic a tiny bit to follow the actor's voice, so it stays in the same plane. It gives them a bit more freedom of movement. So
yeah, because you want them to have physicality to their performance, but actually they've got to do the whole thing pointing at the microphone. Yeah,
or,
it's going to be.
It doesn't have to be pointing at the microphone, but they have to stay in the same in a really rigid plane. It's not a very free thing to do. I mean, you get more freedom obviously if you come off mic, but as soon as you come off mic, you get more background, you lose definition, all the problems that you're worried about.
So we're going to explore this one with, and you call it, is it native binaural? Is that when you're recording in binaural?
I mean, that's what I call it. I don't know if that's, yes. I think
I like that term. That is, I'm going to call it that from now on. You've coined a term there. So with the this idea of the difference between doing it in post and actually doing it native, some of the people I've discussed it with say that this is, for me, it's that approaching, coming towards, and that feeling like you're really inside the drama is seems to me, in my ears, more acute with the native one. But it's when I listen to binaural, it doesn't say whether it's native or whether it's made in half done in the studio. Though I'm beginning to suspect that some of the productions I listen to are, mainly because I don't get that sense of depth and I don't get height.
Hang on. It's the difference in terminology. Native, by that I mean using a binaural microphone. It's nothing to do with being in studio or not.
No, nothing to do with studio. As opposed to when I say doing it in post-production, where you've recorded mono or stereo, but you've basically, whether you've done it as a Dolby surround or whether you've just done the panning, that you've created the binaural effect in post-production and used normal production techniques with normal mics, which makes a lot of sense. And part of me thinks that would be lovely if it has that same visceral effect. And for some productions, that would be fine. But the particular dramas that I've written, really, the whole point of doing it in binaural is to have that very visceral effect and that sense of forwards and back and above and below within this sound recorder. She calls it a Hershey's kiss, and there's a particular shape where you're picking up the sound and knowing she's kind of got it in her head that there's this particular space where you get the best out of the mic, and you don't want to go outside of that, or you just miss it.
Mic.
Yeah.
Right.
But which is going to be different to the
not
Newman, I imagine.
Heard, but yeah. I mean, the problem that I also found in doing temporal first. No, this was in this. I do this thing called the Lovecraft Investigations, which is a sort of
horror.
It's retelling. Yeah, it's sort of mixed with British folklore. It's rewritten and all the racism taken out and all that sort of stuff. But so I will occasionally do binaural scenes in that. And when I first did those, I used binaural plugins. So I had my post-production tools and did binaural plugins, and I found them to be really not very good. They don't, because I don't know what maths they use in them, but I think that you should be able to say, my other recording was done on a Neumann dummy head, or my other recording was done on a H3 or whatever. But you just get a binaural plug-in, and it just doesn't match. And I've never found it match anything. And in fact, there's somebody who I was in Romania a couple of weeks ago with a sound designer from Spain. He does everything in binaural, and he's got a Zoom H3. And I asked him about how he gets things matching, and he said, "Well, I use a plugin." I thought I could never make them sound right.
When you say matching, you mean
like to sound
additional
like
sound effects, maybe. Yeah.
So to feel like they're inhabiting the same space, it just doesn't. I can't find anything that works, or I haven't found anything that works.
But you find that if you do you mix Dolby Surround, that when that's mixed down to headphones, that basically, what does it choose? Certain tracks go into the right ear and certain tracks go into the left.
Well, before that, because all the Foley and stuff is done on the same microphone that I record the voices with, the EQ matches perfectly on that, and I get my stereo positioning and my off micness right at the point of recording. And then, so when you put it in the Atmos space, it's much more likely to sit before you've even done anything, sit sounding right, because I've recorded things the right distance from the mic and the right angle of the mic and all that sort of stuff. So it takes less effort for the Dolby processing to put it in the right place. It just all gels a bit better. And there's something about it that the definition, it's like more in focus. So the voices can be more in focus. The backgrounds are more in focus. With the native binaural, it's always a little bit, it just sounds a bit 70s, a bit like
it's like the background is stuck on with glue, and you're just trying to make sure that the key information is coming through.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's how I've experienced it. I love that sense of that sort of 70s done on tape. And it's funny you should say that, because I remember when video first came out, and it all looked so clean and horrible, and they were putting filters on the video cameras to make it look more like film. So they were messing up the image to be more filmic. And in a way, for me, that sort of native binaural recording is a bit messy, and it is and I think for me it has a sort of cinematic element, because of you've got instead of framing and the way you would frame something as cinematographer and positioning people in the frame, which is part of telling the story, that you can use the distance and the positioning in the sound and choreographed in a way to give you a sense as a listener of what the subtext is, and what what themes are being it has possibilities that I don't see with stereo to tell the story. And that's the aspect of it that I'm interested in, which is why I'm prepared to give it a go.
I don't actually find that to be true. You know, I've done 30 years of stereo and you know, doing Dolby Atmos now. I think good storytelling is good storytelling. The fact that you can hear it in a slightly different way, I don't think that that's a factor. You know, I choose to do quite a lot of things in stereo because there's an immediacy to it. You know, lots of rock bands won't put their albums out in Atmos. You know, I love Radiohead. It's a certain thing that I love, and that on one level would be super suited to an Atmos mix because they have all the little elements flying around. It's a real sound designer's band, but their producer Nigel Godrich, who is actually the son of a BBC sound designer, so thinks very much in these terms. He said that the Atmos thing dissipates the power, and that stereo gives a power and an immediacy and an impact, which as soon as you put it into Atmos disappears. And I have to say that for that sort of music, I'll buy that. I think that's probably true. So it all depends what you want to get from it. With everything, it's trade-offs. Binaural will give you a certain thing, stereo will give you a certain thing, Atmos will give you a certain thing. It's about finding the right tool for the job. And I don't think you can say that binaural is more immediate or more immersed than stereo.
No, no, I don't think that. For me, it has the potential, and that's what I'm exploring, to create an emotional connection to what you're listening to in a way that I struggle with more when I'm, you know, even when it, you know, if it's beautifully written and beautifully directed, I can have a fantastic listening experience. But, you know, if you've got, let's just say hypothetically, a scene where two characters playing a cat and mouse game with each other, and where what they're saying in words isn't necessarily what's actually really going on. And if you were seeing that, you'd see the positioning and you'd see the framing. I'm thinking specifically about the opening scene to *Inglourious Bastards* with Lander, the Nazi soldier, and the farmer, and the power struggle that they have, which is beautifully done through the cinematography. And I was just thinking, if you were to kind of replicate that as a sort of just as an example, of what binaural could potentially do, that you might, for example, have the farmer in one ear, and you'd have the Nazi, and maybe he's over there and he's putting things up and down on a dresser, and then he's coming in closer, and then as the power dynamic changes,
why don't you get that in stereo?
He's moving around. So this is what I want to understand. So what is it that you get with binaural that you don't get with stereo?
Only the 360, atmospheres and things like that. I totally don't agree that you can't do that in stereo, because that's what we do all the time in stereo. You use the microphone to that is my job, is to create those 3D spaces with a stereo microphone. So you have your distances, you have your blocking, people are moving all over the place. You build a set. You know, the thing I'm doing tomorrow is domestic scenes in my kitchen. So, you know, you're building a 3D world, but you hear it in stereo. So all you're losing is an atmosphere. You're losing the feel of a world around you, which is nice. And
height. Can you, if someone's come and just stand slightly above the mic, it sounds like they're there. You don't get that.
Yeah. You get it in their voice.
And what about, and if they're behind you, do you get it like the hairs on the back of your neck go up as they're behind you, which makes you want to? You don't get that.
But then, how often can you use that? You can use that at most once in a play, because otherwise it becomes a gimmick. But the way you do it is you have somebody standing on a chair, and they do it for real, and it's all about the diaphragm. You know, I was doing a thing in studio, because it had to be in studio last week, and there was somebody calling up to a young girl on a wall, and so you put the mic like that pointing down for the guy, so he's got the stretch in his throat and his diaphragm, and the girl I put sort of crouched over with the microphone on a chair with the mic on the floor, so she's looking down, and most of it is done not with what you perceive as height, but with the diaphragm and the positioning of the body. So I think that binaural as a format is great, and you can do good things. But I totally think that you can get as much emotional connection out of stereo, and as much immersion out of stereo if you do it well. But it's hard to. They're all hard to do well.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't attribute anything magical to binaural, because its downsides are very, very big.
Yes, they are.
And you hear them if you're listening carefully. You hear them. And bang on the old drum again. The reason I like Atmos is because you have the benefits of both, because you have the clarity and things of the stereo, but you build the world around it. So you just have you can create a world rather than the binaural might go and say, well, this is the world you're getting. Deal with it. Yeah.
So with the Atmos, do you also get that sense of height and behind you? So you literally get everything you get with binaural through Dolby Atmos.
Yes.
And then
it's clearer and more controllable. Yeah.
And then you mix it down to be more of two binaural, one of more in one ear, one than the other ear. So if something happens behind you, you want to turn around exactly as if it was done in binaural. So
in fact, you have objects. You mix it in Dolby Atmos with objects, and you literally move the object. There's a head. If you look at the Dolby Atmos page, there's a head in a theatre, and you literally take the dot and you move the dot behind the head, and it follows. So you do it all in software, and you physically move things in space, and you have 128 objects, and you can see how they're all moving in real time.
And Logic Pro, I know, offers it. Is that a perfectly good software to use to play around with it?
Yeah.
So you're pretty well convincing me here. So if to record this play, which is a kind of let's say hypothetically we do it as native binaural as an experiment. It's less than half an hour. It's not a massive great series, and also recorded it to mix in Dolby Atmos, because it'd be really interesting to do a comparison. What would be with the recording with Dolby Atmos? Excuse my ignorance. Would you be mainly recording, miking everyone up, mono dialogues, and then doing your wide tracks and laying your back? Going through your effects library afterwards, the conventional way.
When I did temporal, I almost always ran my Neumann stereo mic as well. The problem is that the mic positioning needs to be different for both.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to go, okay, I'm going to do this on the binaural mic, or I'm going to do it on the stereo mic. So I suppose what I ended up doing quite a lot is recording the scene for real in stereo on location, and then taking a binaural wild track of it just to fill it out a bit. Now that's not ideal, because what I've developed since then is I've developed I've not developed it, I've just chucked it together. I've got Neumann KM184s, which are really nice small microphones that you can put into a 5.0 surround, so you can record native surround.
Wow.
Which you can just bung that straight into Dolby Atmos. so that gives you the full surround for your Atmoses, um, just to fill out what you're doing in the scene. So that has implications that you then, if you're recording in stereo and you know you're going to do that, you need to mic slightly closer because you're adding an extra layer of background on it. So, and that also changes the EQ on the mic, what you want. It has follow-ons, but yeah.
So the sound record is, so for example, maybe locking the Zoom HR on binaural, and the actors will rehearse and as if it's binaural, but she'll be there with the stereo Zoom mic, a normal stereo mic, actually recording them as if we were just going to do it on stereo. So we're covering our bases and can do a comparison.
That's what you want. That's what you theoretically want, but it gets very tricky because the actors have to act differently, and you can't put stereo mic in front of your binaural mic because you'll get masking and all this sort of stuff. So it gets very difficult. Kind
of have to do separate scenes, really.
Yeah, you'd have to do a stereo take.
No, that's fair enough. And I'm beginning to think that would. I mean, I know that the sound recordist is quite keen to cover herself and do a sort of traditional version as well as do the binaural one, and to be able to have that comparison would be really, really useful. I think for us as part of this kind of experiment, which it is in some ways.
And also, I don't know about the Zoom in particular, but my initial thought is that you shouldn't record straight to binaural. You should allow it to record ambisonic, because
yes, I was going to ask you about that because I'd read that somewhere, and so why is that? Why?
Well, because if it's just you're capturing all 4 microphones because there's 4 capsules in there, and it just gives you a lot more options in post. So if you record it in ambisonic, then to a degree in the software, if somebody moves their head, you can just sort of tweak the dials left and right, which is the case. It's like twisting the microphone head. So you can't change the panning in binaural, but you can in ambisonic.
Yeah.
So you would do it all in ambisonic, and then when you're happy that you've corrected for the head movements and things like that, then you could output it as binaural.
And presumably with the ambisonic, you're still going to get that behind sense and never to be overused, obviously, and the height. So everything. So there's kind of no reason at all to do it in
ambisonic
unless
is a superior format. Yeah.
So unless somebody's doing ASMR or whatever it's called, that's the only time they would bother to use the binaural, I imagine. Which I'm definitely not using it for.
Even then, you'd start with ambisonic and mix it down. I mean, ASMR, that's a different thing, but that would be my mics anyway. Condenser mics, but there's no reason not to use ambisonic, and that means that then when you're doing your wild tracks, you just grab ambisonic wild tracks.
I'm so glad I spoke to you, David. Because it's like, it's great to have the enthusiastic sound recorders, but nobody knows what they're doing. So gathering this information from you is absolute gold dust.
Well, as you can tell, I get quite dogmatic about things.
No,
it's made all the mistakes there are to make, really.
Yeah, and I'm trust me, I'm listening. And although I am exploring, because specifically the stories that they're not. Radios rely, there's nobody giving you a voiceover. It's drama in audio, and so I am keen to explore ambisonic down to binaural, or whether it's done as mixed as a Dolby Atmos down to binaural, whether that's there were ways to enhance the drama and the themes, and that's what I'm exploring. So I want to investigate that, but at the same time I still want to have something that is a broadcastable quality half-hour drama that would also make a really good pilot for a series of audio dramas, but they have that kind of gritty, real 1970s feel to them. Actually, I'm really glad you said that, because it's the kind of, if you were shooting it, you'd probably use, you might even go as far as 16mm, or certainly 35mm.
That's the Neumann head. I don't think the Zoom sounds like that.
No,
the Zoom is the other end of the tonal range. just from the comparisons I did in Romania with my friend, my Spanish friend, the zooms are a lot thinner because the Neumanns are really dark and bottom heavy, and the zooms are very bottom light. You know, so they you don't get the boom of somebody's voice and the richness of somebody's voice. So that's where you'll be tempted to pull people a little bit closer to the mic because they don't have what I call the depth of field of a decent mic. So people have to work a little bit closer. But hey, you'll find that out, you know, and you'll experiment with what good positioning is and how far off people can go. It's a lot of fun to experiment with. But every Dolby Atmos drama I have heard, the voices have been done in studio, which breaks them before you even start. So you can tell very easily because you don't have the connection with the background. And strangely, lots of the time, all the voices are mono and the effects are stereo, which is really weird. But anyway, people,
But isn't that I heard that when you're with Dolby Surround, you want that do you not put the dialogues in?
Well, for cinema you do.
Right in the middle speaker, so everyone can hear everything properly, and you have all your Atmos around the back. But
it's people that are it's cinema, isn't it? Because you have to lock it to the screen. But when you're doing audio, you don't. That's the joy of it. You don't lock it to a screen. I think that's the problem. Is that people come. They're following the rules, or they're coming from a TV background where you have voices in the centre. But there is no. Why have voices in the centre? Because there is no centre. There's no centre channel. So that also kills it stone dead before it's even begun. So that's my 2 pennies on the Dolby Atmos things I've heard.
So to summarise,
we all like doing things our own way. Basically, is the conclusion I'm coming to.
But is it fair to say that, based on the extensive experience which you've had, that it would make sense to do, if doing a comparison, try out the native binaural, but do it using the ambisonic recording, and then mix it as Dolby Atmos, and then take it down to binaural, and then also if also to record in separate scenes, not try and do it at the same time, a stereo version, which would you say with that as well, mix it as Dolby Atmos and then down to binaural to get a fair comparison, and to end up with being able to see which one is the best for that job?
Yeah, I would say that if you're recording in ambisonic, you're like double layering it if you use Dolby Atmos.
Yes, really, you don't need to really.
So do it as ambisonic, mixing to binaural from the get-go, but you just know that you've got all your ambisonic information there
to work it with
the head movements and things like that. Or you record the way I would do it is you record on location in stereo. You get your ambisonic for your wild tracks on the locations to fill out the backs, because buying it gets expensive buying ambisonic or surround backgrounds. So you've got to build.
And also you want the ones that match.
Ones. Yeah. You can't always get it. If your thing is written for the middle of the UK, then you're fine. But I was doing in temporal. We were largely in New York, or we were on Mars, or we were in all sorts of places. So there's not many surround recordings on Mars in buildings. So you do have to make them. So you can't be too purist about it because it breaks down very quickly, is what I would say. You ideally would, of course, want your own recordings. The other thing to say about ambisonic generally, as in recording ambisonic and then doing whatever you do with it, is that it tends to have less focus in terms of stereo focus. So if you're recording voices, they tend to be a little bit, I don't know, dissipated, or you can't pinpoint exactly. It tends to be broad, a bit smeared, I suppose, the stereo picture. So, but I think that if you used an ambisonic mic to create binaural, I don't know. It might tighten it up. It might not. I don't know.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. And the key question is, for some small independents making these kinds of dramas, what's the price difference to, say, if those two versions are brought to you, maybe the initial track laying done, and you need to mix it and make it sound the best that is possible with what you've given in binaural. Is there, if it's going from ambisonic to binaural, or then you've also got the recorded in stereo, do it to Dolby surround and down to binaural, is there, I'm guessing there'll be a price difference in the amount of time that you're going to spend. How can you give me, I mean, obviously without quoting at this stage, because I am going to ask you to quote, but not on here, but just as a sense of the difference, because that is an important consideration for
it depends very much on the project, of course, because if you're doing something where you can gather lots of your own ambiences, then that makes it a lot quicker. So if you're doing something that's set in the UK, in the woods, where if it's set in more or less the real location, and you have access to that location to record your wild tracks, then it's probably 20% more expensive, probably doing Dolby Atmos.
So not that much then.
No. But if you're doing something that's set like temporal on Mars, in the future on Earth, all that sort of stuff, then, and that needs to all be in surround, then that can very quickly mount up to at least 50% more expensive. Yeah.
Can you imagine that Netflix you go onto Netflix and you go, I'm going to watch a movie, a TV series, or actually I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to listen to something, that will be part of your subscription as another way of digesting drama, rather than going off to Audible, or so that they could keep you in there, because it
Possibly.
is
yeah. I mean, obviously Spotify really went hard on that, and they did it in a very corporate way, in that they threw huge amounts of money at names, and they're backing very quickly away from that. So I wonder if that's had an influence, because they chucked 100 million quid at what's his face who does that controversial podcast, and they're retreating from that. They spent an awful lot of money and didn't get a significant uptick in subscribers, from what I've heard, or they did initially, but it went away.
I will be emailing you and definitely asking you for your rates. So thank you so much for your time and being so generous with your wisdom and what you've shared.
It's fun to chat with somebody who'll listen, really.
and last but not least, what's the favourite binaural audio that you've done that you recommend people go and listen to, if it's out yet?
Yeah, well, it'll be temporal, but that's not out until I think Easter, and that'll be on Audible.
Wow.
And that's 10 half hours. Sci-fi done naturally, I would say.
Wow.
Sci-fi without lasers. It's just living in the future and living in the current day. I'll leave it at that, I think.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, David.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye then. Bye.